The morning they crowned King Rowan, I learned that a law is only worth the man willing to hold it when a queen dares him to look away. My name is Jory Penhale, and on that morning I was 2 years into the Royal Guard of Eldermore, still young enough to believe that the great and titled lived above the rules the rest of us obeyed. I was posted at the tall bronze doors of the presence chamber in the Palace of Harrowgate, and beside me stood the man who would spend that day proving me wrong, Captain Corwin Vale. He was near 50 then, gray coming in at his temples beneath the black bearskin, his red tunic without a wrinkle, his white gloves without a mark, and his eyes fixed on the middle distance as though the whole restless court were a thing he had already seen 100 times and would see 100 times more. The crown had passed at dawn. King Alaric, whose reign had lasted 31 years, had set it down while he still lived. He was old and he was ill, and the wasting sickness that had thinned him through the winter had taken the strength from his hands, but not, whatever certain people wished, the clarity from his mind. In the great hall, before the assembled peers of the realm, he had risen from his chair with 2 stewards at his elbows and placed the crown of Eldermore upon the head of his son. Crown Prince Rowan, son of Alaric and the late Queen Isolde, became King Rowan the first of that name. His wife, the Princess Ilara, became Queen Ilara. Their 3 children, Torin, who was 11, Malin, who was 9, and small Bram, who was 6, stood in a solemn little row in their best clothes, and did not quite understand that the world had turned over beneath their feet. And in the front rank of that hall, dressed in mourning violet that was not mourning at all but a statement, had stood the Queen Consort Morwenna. She had been Alaric's second wife. The late Queen Isolde, Rowan's mother, had died when Rowan was a boy, and in the long gray years after, Alaric had married again, a widow of a lesser house, clever, beautiful in the hard way that outlasts youth, with a grown son and a grown daughter of her own, Lord Cassius, Lady Verena. For a dozen years Morwenna had stood a half-step behind the throne and let the realm believe that the half-step was a courtesy and not a leash. As the king's health failed, she had drawn that leash tighter. She read his correspondence. She chose who came to his sick room and who was turned at the door. She signed things, and then she had him sign things, and the line between the two grew fainter than any honest court should allow. Everyone in Harrowgate knew it. Almost no one said it. A queen consort is still a queen, and there is a kind of power that survives on the simple fact that people are too well-bred, or too frightened, to name it aloud. But the crown had passed to Rowan now, and a queen consort whose king has stepped down is a very different creature from a queen consort whose king still holds the seals. Morwenna knew it before anyone. I saw it in her face in the great hall at dawn, not grief, not even anger, but calculation, cold and swift, the look of a gambler counting what she still held in her hand while the table was cleared around her. By mid-morning, she came to the doors where Vale and I stood. She came with Lord Cassius at one shoulder and 2 of her own household men at the other, and she came fast, her violet skirts hissing over the marble, so that the clerks and courtiers in the antechamber scattered out of her path the way pigeons scatter from a boot. She did not slow as she reached us. She expected the doors to open. In 12 years they always had. "Stand aside, Captain," she said. "I will see the king." Behind those bronze doors, King Rowan sat in his first private council, his uncle the Lord Chancellor, Princess Adela, who was the old king's sister, 2 justices of the realm and the keeper of the rolls. They had sealed the room an hour before. The order that had come out to us was plain. No admittance, no exception, until the king himself called for the doors to open. Vale did not move. "His Majesty is in closed council, madam," he said. His voice was low and even, a voice built for corridors like this one, where a shout is a kind of weakness and quiet is a kind of stone. "I am to admit no one. When he rises, you will be sent for." "Sent for," she said the 2 words as though they were an insult, and perhaps to her they were. "Do you know who I am, Captain Vale?" "I do, madam, Queen Consort of Eldermore." "Then you know that these doors open for me." They opened for the Queen Consort of King Alaric, Vale said. King Alaric has laid down the crown. His son commands this house now, and his son has sealed this room. I hold his order. I cannot hold yours over it. For a moment nobody breathed. Lord Cassius shifted his weight, a big soft man in a coat too fine for the hour, and I saw his hand drift toward Vale's arm as though he meant to simply move the captain out of the way you'd move a chair. I stepped a half pace in, and Cassius thought better of it, and his hand fell. Morwenna studied Vale as if she were pricing a horse. You are new to your captaincy, she said. Barely a year. A man in a new post should think very carefully about whose memory is long and whose is not. Kings are young now. They will be young a long time, and a queen who is turned from a door remembers the face that turned her. I will remember it too, madam, Vale said. I turned no one. I held a door I was ordered to hold. She smiled then, and it was worse than anger. Before this week is out, she said softly, so that only the four of us close by could hear it, this crown will answer to me, and so will you. She turned in a sweep of violet and went back the way she'd come, Cassius trotting to keep her pace, and the antechamber let out its held breath all at once. I was shaking a little. I hoped my gloves hid it. Captain, I murmured, she'll have your post by supper. Perhaps, Vale said, eyes forward again, already gone back to stone. Posts are given and taken. That is nothing. Mind your line, Penhale. I minded my line. But I have thought about what he said for the rest of my life. Posts are given and taken. That is nothing. Because it was the first time I understood that a man could hold something inside him that no one had the power to give him, and therefore no one had the power to take. Vale did not serve Morwenna. He did not in the end even serve Rowan, not the way I had thought. He served a thing older than either of them, and I did not yet have the word for it. I would have the word before the week was out. She was right about that much. To understand what happened in the presence chamber 4 days later, you have to understand the room the king sat in that morning, and the paper that was already moving through it like a cold draft under a door. I did not hear the closed council myself. But Harrogate is an old house full of servants and clerks, and nothing sealed behind bronze doors stays sealed for long. What Princess Adela later told the tribunal under oath was this. King Rowan had not called that first council to grieve his father or to plan a feast. He had called it to open the books. For 3 years, while Alaric sickened, the accounts of the royal household had been kept under the Queen Consort's hand. She had named the treasurer. She had named the auditors. And in 3 years, a great deal of money that belonged to the crown, to the realm, which is to say to the people who paid their tithes and their tolls into it, had gone out of the household coffers into places the rolls described only vaguely. A dowry here, a settlement there. A grant to a house no one had heard of, which turned out, when a patient justice followed the thread, to belong to Lord Cassius under another name. More than money, there was the matter of the late Queen Isolde's estate, the jewels, the northern manor, the endowment Isolde had left in trust for her son, and after him, for her grandchildren. That trust had been quietly emptied and relettered while Alaric was too weak to read what he was signing. And there was the matter of the king's own seal. In the last year of his reign, Alaric had signed a startling number of decrees he later could not remember, decrees that always, somehow, enlarged the reach of the woman who brought him his medicine and turned his visitors from the door. Rowan had known some of this as crown prince and had been able to prove none of it, because the woman who held the seals also held the king, and to accuse her was to accuse a dying man's wife at his very bedside. So he had waited. He had let her believe he was a soft young heir who would rather keep the peace than open a wound. And on the morning the crown came to him, he sealed a room and opened the books. That was the paper moving under the door. That was what Morwenna had smelled when she came to us at mid-morning with calculation in her eyes. She had not come to see the king out of grief or duty. She had come to find out how much he knew. Vale knew none of the particulars that morning, and neither did I. But Vale knew the shape of the woman, and he knew the shape of the days ahead. And that evening, when we came off our watch and the torches were lit along the guardroom wall, he did a thing I had never seen a captain do. He sent for the standing order book of the Royal Guard, the old bound ledger that holds the oaths and the statutes, the thing most captains keep in a chest and never open, and he set it on the table between us and he told me to read. "You heard her at the door," he said. "You may hear worse before the week is done. When it comes, Penhale, you will not have time to decide what kind of man you are. You will only have time to be the man you already decided to be. So decide tonight with the book open and not on the day with a queen shouting in your face." I read the oath we had both sworn, not to a person, not to a name, but to the crown of Eldermore and the law of the realm, to hold the king's peace and to hold it against any who broke it, of whatever rank or house or blood. I read the old statute that every guardsman is taught and few ever truly weigh, that no command, from any mouth however high, can bind a guardsman to break the law, that an unlawful order is no order at all, and that the guardsman who obeys an unlawful order answers for it as if he had conceived the crime himself. "Of whatever rank or house or blood," Vale said when I looked up. "Read it again." I read it again. "That is the whole of it," he said. "Everything that will happen this week is written in that one line. A crown on a head does not lift the head above the law. It only means the law must be held by a steadier hand, because the one breaking it has further to fall and more men willing to catch her." He closed the book. "Most men, when a great person breaks the law in front of them, discover very suddenly that they cannot read. Don't be most men." I have carried that sentence like a coin in my pocket for 30 years. Most men, when a great person breaks the law in front of them, discover very suddenly that they cannot read. Morwenna did not wait for the crown to answer to her. She began, the very next day, to make it answer. She had spent 12 years building a faction, and a faction does not vanish overnight because the man at its head has changed. Half the household offices were held by her placements: the master of the wardrobe, the keeper of the wine, 2 of the 4 undersecretaries, the man who carried the king's correspondence. She still had Cassius's money, which was to say the crown's money in Cassius's coffers, and money buys patience and patience buys men. And she had the oldest weapon of a threatened court, the whisper. The whisper she chose was clever because the best lies are the ones already half believed. She let it be known, through the mouths of the people who owed her, that the new king was not well in his mind. That grief for his father, for the father was clearly dying now, everyone could see it, had unsettled him. That he had sealed himself in rooms and accused loyal servants of imaginary crimes. That a young man crowned too suddenly might need, for the good of the realm, a steadier and older hand near the throne, a regent's hand, a hand that had guided King Alaric wisely through his last hard years and might guide his grieving son through his first. It was a beautiful lie. It turned every true thing against its owner. Rowan sealing a room to hunt an embezzler became Rowan hiding from phantoms. Rowan's grief, which was real, became Rowan's weakness. And Morwenna's own long theft became the very evidence of her fitness to rule. See how she had managed everything, how the household had run under her hand, how lost the boy would be without her. I heard the whisper reach the guardroom on the second day. One of the older men, a decent enough soldier named Halloran, repeated it over his supper as though it were common weather, a shame about the young king. They say he's not himself. They say the queen may have to steady things. Vale set down his cup. "Who is they, Halloran?" Halloran blinked. It's what's said, Captain." "It is what's paid to be said," Vale answered. "There is a difference, and a guardsman who cannot tell the one from the other is a danger to the man he guards. The king sealed a room. That is his right, the house is his. What he found in it is not yet ours to know. Until it is, we do not carry the Queen Consort's water to each other's tables. Is that clear?" It was clear. But I watched Halloran's face, and I saw that the whisper had already done its small work. had already planted the little seed of doubt that says perhaps the great lady has a point. Perhaps it would be easier. And I understood then that Morwenna was not fighting Rowan with swords. She was fighting him with the natural human wish for things to be easy, and that is a far stronger army than any she could have hired. On the third day she tried to buy Vale. It was done properly, at a proper remove, the way such things are always done so that no one need ever admit to them. Lord Cassius found Vale in the long gallery at the change of the watch and walked with him a while, talking of nothing. The weather, the funeral arrangements that would soon be needed for the old king, the sad state of the realm. And then, as though it had only just occurred to him, Cassius mentioned that the office of Lord Warden of the palace, the man who commanded the whole guard, above the captains, a post that had been vacant a year, was a post his mother had it in her power to see filled. A captain who had shown he understood the delicacy of these times, who knew when a door was better left unwatched, who could be trusted not to inflame a fragile king with talk of sealed rooms and old accounts. Such a captain might find himself Lord Warden before the month was out. Vale walked the length of the gallery beside him, and did not answer until they reached the end of it. "Tell your mother," he said, "that I heard her at the door, and tell her that the man she is trying to buy is the same man who stood at that door, and he was not for sale then either." He stopped and faced Cassius fully, and though I was too far down the gallery to hear it, I saw Cassius's soft face change, and Vale told me the rest that night. "I told him a thing he did not expect," Vale said. "I told him that a lord wardenship given for looking away is a debt, not an honor, and that a man who takes it spends the rest of his life paying it back in the one coin he swore never to spend. And I told him that I had read the order book, and that I knew what an unlawful order was, and that if the day came when his mother gave me one, the answer would already be written." "Was he frightened?" I asked. "No," Vale said. "That was the worst of it. He was puzzled. He genuinely could not understand a man who would refuse the thing everyone wants. That is what a life close to Morwenna does. It hollows out the place where the refusal lives until you cannot even remember that other men still have one." He was quiet a moment. "Watch Cassius Penhale, not because he is dangerous. Because he is what obedience becomes when it forgets there was ever a reason for it." That same night, the third night, Morwenna made her one true error before the reception, and it is the part of this story I find hardest to set down, because it came nearest to a child. She did not go herself. She sent word through the master of the wardrobe, who was one of her placements, that the royal children were to be moved for their safety to the old Queen Consort's apartments, away from the king, who was, the whisper again, unwell and not to be trusted near them. It was dressed as concern, a guardian's concern, and it was, if you followed the logic of her forged decree, perfectly consistent. The paper named her guardian of the children, and a guardian gathers her wards. Had it worked, she would have had Torrin and Malin and Bram under her own roof by morning, and a king who wished to see his own children would have had to come to her to do it, and the whole shape of the week would have bent to that one fact. It did not work, and the reason it did not work was a guardsman. The children's wing of Harrogate was held that night by a man of Vale's company named Odell, not a clever man, not an ambitious one, a plain steady soldier of the kind the guard is mostly made of. The master of the wardrobe came to him near midnight with two of Morwenna's household men and the order to move the children, and it was a lawful-sounding order, spoken by a household officer with a straight face, and a lesser guard might have stood aside for it. Odell did not. He had been made to read the order book too, and the thing he held to, when the fine officer pressed him, was the simplest thing in the whole statute, that the children of the royal house move on the word of the king or the queen, their parents, and no other, of whatever rank or claim. "I have the Queen Consort's authority," the master of the wardrobe said. "I have the king's children behind this door," Odell answered, "and I have no order from the king or the queen to move them, and until I do, this door does not open, and if you press it, sir, I will wake the captain and the king both, and we will all four explain ourselves to his majesty at midnight. Shall I?" They did not want that. Of course they did not. The whole design depended on it being done quietly, before anyone with the right to say no was awake to say it. The master of the wardrobe withdrew, and the children slept the night through and never knew that anything had passed their door. And in the morning Odell reported it to Vale plainly, the way he did everything, and Vale reported it to the king. It became, later, one more charge on the roll, the attempt to remove the royal children under a forged authority, but that is the law's dry way of putting it. The living way of putting it is that a plain, steady man stood at a door in the dark and would not open it, and 3 children slept, and that is the whole of what the royal guard is for, and it is a larger thing than any coronet. I want it understood, because I have told this story to young guards for 30 years, and there is always one who asks it. No child of that house was ever touched, ever frightened, ever in a hand not their parents' or their guards'. The wrong Morwenna reached for was real, and it was averted cleanly at a door, by a man doing the ordinary thing he had sworn to do. That is how the worst wrongs are most often stopped, not in the great bright rooms with the whole court watching, but in a dark corridor at midnight by a soldier no one will ever write a song about. I have tried, in these pages, to write Odell his song. It is only 3 sentences long, because that is how long the thing took, but I would not leave it out for the world. When Vale heard of it in the morning, he did a thing I had not seen him do. He went to Odell and he took the man's hand, Vale, who touched no one, and he said, "You held the last door, Odell, the one that mattered most and the one no one was watching. Remember that when the great day comes and they praise the man who did the loud thing, you did the quiet one first." Then he came and found me, and he told me the whole of it, and I saw that he was more shaken by that midnight door than by anything the queen had done in the open, and I asked him why. "Because the open things I can guard against," he said. "I can double the watch on a reception. I cannot double the watch on every dark corridor in a house this size. In the end, the law is only as strong as the plainest man holding the smallest door on the night no captain is looking. She did not fail because I am clever, Penhale. She failed because Odell can read. If she had found one guard on that wing who had decided, in the quiet, that a queen's word was enough, she would have had the children by morning, and this would be a very different story and a much darker one." He was silent a while. "That is why I made you all read the book, not for the bright rooms. For the dark corridors, for the nights no one is watching but the man himself. I have said that Vale served a thing older than any king, and that at the start of this account I did not have the word for it. I began to find the word that night, and I will set down here the story he told me of where he found it himself, because he told it to me only once, and a man's reasons are the marrow of him. Vale had not been born to the guard. He had come up from a country town, the son of a magistrate, a small local justice who kept the peace in a market town, and settled its quarrels, and was, Vale said, the most ordinary honest man who ever lived. When Vale was a boy of about Torrin's age, a great lord of that country, a man with a hunting lodge nearby and a temper and a belief, bred into him, that the law was a net for small fish, rode down a farmer's child on the road in his careless haste and did not stop, and the child was hurt badly, though the child lived. And the great lord's men came to Vale's father, the magistrate, and made it very clear, in the courteous way such things are made clear, that there would be no complaint, that the roll would show the road was empty, that a wise magistrate in a small town understood which quarrels were his to settle and which were above him. And my father could not read that day, Vale told me. That is how I have always put it to myself, though he could read as well as any man. He looked at the great lord's men, and he looked at the farmer, and he discovered that he could not read the law he had sworn to keep. He wrote the roll the way they wanted it. The road was empty, no complaint. And the farmer's child walked crooked for the rest of his life, and my father kept his post, and we ate well enough, and he was never the same man again, not for one day, until he died. He did not drink and he did not weep. He simply went gray inside, the way iron goes when it is left in the rain from the middle out, where you cannot see it until it is through. He had learned that he was a man who could not read when a great person stood in front of him, and knowing that about yourself is a slow poison there is no cure for. "Is that why you joined the guard?" I asked. "It is why I read the book until I knew it in my sleep," Vale said. "I decided, as a boy, watching my father go gray, that I would be a man who could still read on the day it cost him something. I did not know then that the day would come with a crown on it. I thought if it ever came at all, it would come with a country lord and a farmer's child on a road. But it is always the same day, Penhale, wearing different clothes. There is always a great person and always a law and always a moment where you discover whether you can still read. My father found out he could not. I promised his memory that I would find out I could. That is all I was doing in the presence chamber. I was keeping a promise to a gray man 30 years dead. I have never, before or since, understood a man so completely in so few words. And I understood, too, why the buying of him had never had a chance. Why the Lord Wardenship dangled in the long gallery had fallen flat as a coin on a table. You cannot buy a man whose whole self is a promise to a dead father that he will not be bought. There is nothing in him to sell. The fourth day was the day of the old king. King Alaric, though he had laid down the crown, had not laid down his life, whatever the whispers pretended. He was frail, desperately frail, wheeled now in a chair, his voice a thread, but the wasting had left his mind alone, and on the fourth morning he asked to be brought to his son. This was itself a small earthquake, because for a year Morwenna had controlled who reached the old king, and now the old king was reaching out on his own past her to Rowan. She could not stop it. He was the father of the reigning king and the former sovereign of the realm, and even her placements would not bar that door. They brought him to a small, warm sitting room off the royal apartments, and I was one of the 2 guards posted at it, so this part I saw with my own eyes and not through the walls of Harrowgate. Rowan came to his father and knelt by the chair and took the old man's thin hands, and for a while they only spoke as a father and a son speak, of small things, of the boy Rowan had been. Princess Adela was there, and the keeper of the rolls, and a justice with a case of documents. And then the old king said the thing that changed the week. "I signed them," he said. His voice was faint, but I heard it, and so did everyone in that room, and so, under oath, did they all repeat it later. "The decrees, the trust, Isolde's trust for you and for your children." I signed it all away, and I did not read it. She would bring the papers with the medicine when the pain was bad and my eyes would not hold the lines, and she would say, "Only your name, my love, only here," and I signed. I knew. Some part of me knew and was too tired and too afraid to be alone to stop it. His fingers tightened on his son's. "I am telling you now while I can still be believed, before she can say I was mad. I was not mad, Rowan. I was weak, and she used my weakness, and that is a different thing, and I will not have her hide her crime behind my sickness. Write it down. Bring me a pen. I will set my hand to it before witnesses, and let her call an oath sworn before the keeper of the rolls the raving of a madman if she dares." They wrote it down. The old king signed it, with the justice and the keeper of the rolls and Princess Adela as witnesses, his hand shaking so that Rowan had to steady the pen. And this time he read every word aloud first, twice, so that no one could ever say he had not known what he signed. That deposition was the thing that broke the whisper, because a former king in his right mind before sworn witnesses, saying I was not mad, she robbed me, is a hard sound to argue with. And Morwenna, when it reached her, understood at last that she was not going to talk her way back into power. The easy road had closed. Now there was only the hard one. She chose the hard one. If a queen cannot rule through a king's weakness and cannot talk her way into a regency, and if the old king himself has sworn her crimes into the record, she has, in the end, only 2 choices left. She can submit and answer for what she has done, Or she can try to seize by force what she can no longer take by cunning, to make herself, in one stroke, too large to be judged. Morwenna spent the fourth night making herself large. We did not know that at the time. We pieced it together after. But money was moving that night, and men were being called in from the country houses. Not soldiers exactly, for she had no army, but the household guards of her own line in Cassius's, 40 or 50 hard men with the right to wear a blade in the palace because they served a lady of the blood. 50 men are not a war, but 50 men in the right corridor at the right moment are a very loud argument, and Morwenna had always understood that power is mostly the art of seeming to have more of it than you do. And there was the matter of the succession itself, which she now bent all her cleverness toward poisoning. For here was the thread she meant to pull. King Alaric had a sister, the Princess Adela, and Adela stood high in the order of succession, and beyond Rowan's own children the crown's descent touched several houses. Morwenna's daughter, Lady Verena, had married into one of them. It was a distant claim, a thin claim, the kind of claim that means nothing in a stable realm and everything in a broken one. Morwenna's plan, as the justices later reconstructed it from the papers found in her rooms, was not truly to make Verena queen. It was to make the succession look contested, to raise enough doubt, enough noise, enough competing claims, that the realm would beg for a steady regent to hold the ring while the lawyers argued. And who was steadier, who had held the household through the old king's long decline, than the Queen Consort herself? To make it work, she needed one thing above all others. She needed the appearance of law. A queen who seizes power by naked force is a usurper, and every honest sword turns against her. But a queen who can wave a document, a decree, a codicil, a warrant with a king's seal on it is something far more dangerous, because now the honest men must stop and squint and wonder, and in the time they spend wondering, the thing is done. So she forged one. She had the means. She had spent a year with the old king's seal under her hand. She knew its weight and its wax and the little chip on the edge of the matrix that marked a true impression from a false one. And in the chaos of an old king's decline, a great many half-signed, half-finished papers pass across a sickroom desk. From these she built her instrument, a decree, in a fair copy of King Alaric's own late trembling hand, dated to a week before the abdication, declaring that in the event of the old king's incapacity, the Queen Consort Morwenna should hold the regency of the realm and the guardianship of the royal children, and that no act of the crown should be valid without her seal beside it. If it were believed, it made her the true power behind the throne, retroactively, by the dead, soon-to-be-dead king's own decree. It made Rowan's sealing of that first council an act against a lawful regent. It even reached its cold hand toward the children, Torin and Malin and Bram, naming her their guardian, though I will say now, so that it is not left to hang over this account, that no child of that house was ever in her reach or her power for one moment. The guard she meant to command stood between her and every nursery door, and the guardianship she forged was a claim on paper and never once a hand on a child. But she meant to wave that paper in the king's own face, before the assembled court, at the one moment when the whole realm was watching. That moment was the old king's memorial procession, 4 days hence. No, I get ahead of myself, and the truth is stranger and swifter than that. She did not wait 4 days. She could not. The old king's sworn deposition was already circulating among the justices, and every hour it circulated her forgery grew less believable, because a document that says the queen must approve every act sits very badly beside a sworn statement from the king himself that the queen is a thief who guided his pen while he wept. She had to strike before the deposition became common knowledge. She had to strike while the court was still uncertain, still half listening to the whisper. She chose the reception. On the 5th day, King Rowan was to hold his first formal reception as sovereign, the presentation of the great houses, the oaths of the peers, the moment when the realm's lords come one by one to kneel before the new king and pledge their faith. It is the most public act of a reign's first week. The whole court would be in the presence chamber. The justices would be there, and Princess Adela, and the ambassadors of neighboring realms, and every lord whose doubt Morwenna had spent 5 days cultivating. If she was going to make the succession look contested, there was no better stage in the world than the exact ceremony meant to make it look settled. Vale saw it coming. Not the particulars, he did not know about the forgery yet, but the shape. On the evening of the 4th day, he doubled the guard on the presence chamber for the reception, and he came to the king himself to ask leave for a thing captains do not usually ask. I was on the door and I heard it. Vale asked the king's leave to search, discreetly, every person of Morwenna's household who entered the presence chamber the next day, and to bar from the chamber any armed man not of the royal guard, of whatever rank or house. The Lord Chancellor, who was with the king, objected at once. It was unheard of, he said, to search the Queen Consort's household as though they were footpads on the day of the reception before the ambassadors. It would be the insult of the age. It would seem to confirm every whisper that the king was unwell and saw enemies in shadows. Better, the Chancellor said, to let the day pass with dignity and settle the accounts quietly afterward. Better not to make a scene. Better not to make a scene. That was the false dawn, the reasonable, ruinous, well-bred voice that says the safest thing is to let the great lady have her moment and clean up after. I saw the king weigh it. He was young, and it was his first week, and every instinct of a court had trained him that scandal was the great enemy and smoothness the great friend. Letting Morwenna into the reception unsearched, letting the day pass, settling it quietly, it was the easy road, wearing the mask of the wise one. Vale did not raise his voice. He said one thing. Your Majesty, my Lord Chancellor, I have read the Queen Consort's face at 3 doors this week. She has stopped trying to be believed. When a person who has always fought to be believed stops fighting for it, it is because they have decided they no longer need to be, because they mean to make belief unnecessary. That is a person who intends to do a thing in the open and dare the room to stop it. I do not know what the thing is. I know that I would rather insult her household at the door than bury the cost of my courtesy afterward. Give me the leave and let the insult fall on me. I will wear it. I have worn worse. The king looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, You searched no one today at my father's door, Captain, and my father came to me, and I was glad of it. I have learned this week that the men who wanted no scene were the men who profited from the dark. Search them. If it is an insult, it is mine to give, not yours. And Captain, the king paused, if the thing you fear comes in front of the whole court on the first day of my reign, and I hesitate, because I am young and it is my father's wife and the ambassadors are watching, do not you hesitate. You have my leave to hold the law before you hold my comfort. Is that understood between us? It is understood, Your Majesty, Vale said. And so the leave was given, and the false dawn, the smooth, easy, ruinous road was refused not by a captain's stubbornness, but by a young king who had learned, in 5 hard days, exactly what it cost to be liked instead of right. The night before the reception, 2 people came to Captain Vale in the guardroom, and both visits told me more about the days ahead than any order could have. The first was Princess Adela. She came late and alone without ceremony, which was itself remarkable, for the king's aunt did not walk the palace at night like a steward. She was a plain-spoken woman of 60 who had watched Morwenna rise for 12 years and had never once been fooled by her, and she had spent those 12 years being called, behind her back, a bitter old spinster who saw enemies everywhere, which is the price a clear-eyed person always pays in a court that would rather be comfortable. She sat down across from Vale at the guardroom table, and she did not waste his time. Captain, she said, I have been trying to tell this court the truth about that woman for 12 years, and for 12 years I have been the difficult one, the unwelcome one, the one they seat at the far end of the table. Tomorrow she will do something in the open, because the deposition has cornered her, and cornered animals do not go quietly. When she does it, this court's every instinct will be to smooth it over, to spare the embarrassment, to protect the dignity of the throne, to settle it later and quietly. That instinct is how she has survived. That instinct is the water she swims in. She leaned forward. I cannot stop that instinct. I am only the bitter ant. But you can. You are the one man in this house whose duty it is not to smooth things over. So I have come to ask you one thing, soldier to soldier. When the moment comes and the whole room wishes you would look away, do not look away, whatever it costs. I will stand behind you in the reckoning after. I have waited 12 years for a reckoning and I will not flinch from it. But you must give me one to stand behind. You must make it real in the open where it cannot be tidied. Will you? Madam, Vale said, I have already decided that. I decided it before you came. But I am glad you came, because a man likes to know he is not the only one who can read the weather. If the reckoning comes, stand where the king can see you. He will need a clear head near him that is not afraid of her, and yours has never been. She studied him a moment, and something in her hard old face eased. They told me you could not be bought, she said. I did not believe it. In this house everyone can be bought, it is only a question of the coin. I am glad to have been wrong. She rose. Until tomorrow, Captain. The second visitor came an hour later, and it was Lord Cassius, and he did not sit down. He stood in the doorway of the guardroom, soft and pale and sweating a little though the night was cold, and he had the look of a man who has come to say a thing his mother does not know he is saying. Captain Vale, he said, I want to ask you something, and I want a plain answer, because I have not had a plain answer from anyone in 12 years, my mother least of all. He swallowed. If it goes badly for her tomorrow, if she does something that cannot be undone, what happens to me? Vale looked at him for a long moment. That depends entirely on what you do, my lord, and on what you have already done. I have done what she told me, Cassius said, and there was something almost like grief in it. My whole life. I have signed where she pointed and held the coffers she filled and worn the coats she chose. I never asked what the money was or whose it had been. It was easier not to ask. You said it to me in the gallery. You said I was what obedience becomes when it forgets there was ever a reason for it. I have not slept since. He looked at his own soft hands. I do not know how to be anything else. But I am asking you, because you seem to be the only man here who knows. Is it too late for a man like me to decide something for himself, just once? And Vale, who had been so hard with him in the gallery, softened by a degree I did not often see. It is never too late to decide, my lord, he said. It is only harder the longer you wait, because the deciding muscle wastes when it is never used, like a leg too long in a splint. But it is not gone. If tomorrow your mother does a wrong thing and asks you to help her do it, do not. That is a decision. It will not undo the years. But it is a beginning, and a man is allowed to begin at any age. Even yours. Even hers, though I do not think she will. Cassius nodded slowly and left without another word, and Vale watched him go. Will he? I asked. I do not know, Vale said. I planted it. Whether it grows is his, not mine. But mark it, Penhale, I have just watched the first honest question that man has asked in 40 years. That is worth more than it looks. The mother built a whole scheme on the certainty that her son would always hand her the knife. Tomorrow we will learn whether she was right. We learned. In the event when the moment came, Cassius did not hand her the knife. She took it from his belt herself, snatched it before he could stop her, and the truth is that his hand reaching after it, too late, trying to stop her, was the one thing that saved him at the tribunal. For 100 witnesses swore they saw the son grasp after the blade to keep his mother from the deed. He had begun that morning exactly as Vale had told him he might, in the smallest possible way, half a second too slow. It was not much, but it was his own, and it was the first thing in his life that had been. Morning came cold and clear, and before ever a lord set foot in the presence chamber, the first battle of the day was fought at the palace gates, and I heard of it while I stood my own post, but Vale had it from the sergeant who held the line. Morwenna's 40 retainers came at the gates an hour before the reception, in a loose hard column, expecting to walk in behind their mistress as her escort of honor, which was their right, or would have been on any ordinary state day. But Vale had posted a full company across the gate, with orders no armed man not of the royal guard should pass, of whatever house, and the sergeant who held it was one of Vale's own and had, like all of them, read the book. The retainer's captain, a scarred man used to being obeyed, rode up and gave the order to open, and named his mistress and warned of her displeasure. "My orders are from the captain of the king's guard," the sergeant said, "and they do not bend to a lady's displeasure. You may pass unarmed, one at a time, and be searched, and stand in the public gallery as any subject may. Or you may keep your steel and keep the far side of this gate. You will not do both." For a long, ugly minute it hung there, 40 hard men and a company of the guard, and the retainer's captain measured the line and found it did not waver, and understood, as his mistress would understand an hour later in the great room, that a line of disciplined men who have already decided is a different and heavier thing than a mob that must make up its mind in the moment. He did not force it. 40 swords cannot break a gate held by men who will die at it, and know beforehand that they will, because the breaking would cost more than any of them had been paid to spend. They milled and they cursed, and they stayed on the far side of the gate for the whole of that day, useless as a threat that has been called, and their mistress walked into the reception alone, believing her argument waited behind her in the yard. It waited. It simply could not get in. And that, more than any speech, is the reason the showdown ended the way it did. Because a captain had understood days before that a queen's true weapon was never her cleverness or her coronet, but the men who would move when she pointed, and he had quietly, lawfully, taken the men away, one locked gate at a time, until all she had left to point with was a borrowed knife. The presence chamber of Harrowgate is the grandest room I have ever stood in, and on the morning of the reception it was grander still. It is long and high, floored in black and white marble, hung with the banners of the great houses, lit by 3 tiers of tall windows that on a bright day fill it with a hard, clean northern light. At the far end, up 3 shallow steps, stands the throne of Eldermore under a canopy of state, and on that morning King Rowan sat upon it for the first time in the sight of his whole court, the crown of Eldermore on his head, Queen Isolde beside him, and the 3 children in their small solemn row a little below. The court filled the room, the great houses in their finery, the justices in their black, the ambassadors in the colors of their realms, the clerks and the stewards and the household along the walls. And the royal guard doubled, along both sides and at every door, red tunics and black bearskins, a spine of discipline running the length of that glittering room. Vale stood at the foot of the throne steps, at the king's right hand, where the captain of the guard stands. I stood at the great doors, where I could see the whole length of the chamber, and where, I would soon be grateful, I could reach the throne in a hard run. At the door, quietly, Vale's men had done their work. Every person of the Queen Consort's household who entered had been searched, courteously, discreetly, in a curtained alcove off the antechamber, but searched. 2 of Cassius's men had been turned away for carrying blades and had gone off swearing. The 40 hard men Morwenna had brought in from the country never got past the outer court. Vale had posted a full company at the palace gates with orders that no armed retainer not of the royal guard should pass, of whatever house, and 40 angry swords had spent the morning milling uselessly in the forecourt while their mistress walked in alone. She did not know that yet. She walked into the presence chamber, believing her argument was waiting in the corridors. She came late, as the great always do, so that the room would see her arrive. She wore violet still and the old Queen Consort's coronet, which was, strictly, no longer hers to wear, but no one had yet dared take it from her, and she came up the center of the chamber through the parting crowd with Lord Cassius and Lady Verena behind her, and she was, I will grant her, magnificent. Whatever else Morwenna was, she was never small. She reached the open space before the throne steps, and she made her reverence to the king, a shallow one. A queen's courtesy to a king she did not accept, and she said, in a voice pitched to fill the whole long room, "Your Majesty, before your court receives the oaths of your houses, There is a matter of law that must be heard, for the sake of the realm and of your late father's true wishes." The room went very still. This was not the order of the ceremony. Every soul in that chamber understood that something had been let loose. King Rowan did not rise and did not frown. "The Queen Consort may speak," he said. And Morwenna produced the paper. She drew it from her sleeve and unrolled it and held it high so the wax seal swung and caught the light. "This is a decree of King Alaric," she said, her voice ringing off the marble, "sealed with his own hand a week before he laid down his crown, when he could still see clearly what his failing son could not. It names me regent of Eldermore in the event of his incapacity, and guardian of the royal children, and it declares—" She turned now to sweep the whole court with her eyes, playing not to the king, but to the doubting lords she had spent 5 days seating, "that no act of the crown is lawful without my seal beside it. Which means, my lords, that this coronation, held in haste while the true king yet lived, this sealing of councils, this hunting of loyal servants, all of it was done against the lawful regent of the realm by a young man whom grief has made unwell, and whom certain ambitious men about him have made a puppet. I do not seek a crown. I seek only what the late king gave me, the right to steady this throne until wiser heads prevail. Let the justices examine this decree. Let the court judge whether the realm is safe in the hands of a boy who seals himself in rooms and sees thieves in his own family." It was, I must say, superbly done. She had turned the whole room. I watched the doubt move across the faces of the lords like wind across a field of grain. Half of them had heard the whisper for 5 days. Now here was a decree with a seal and a queen's ringing certainty and a king who was young and had indeed sealed a council. The justices leaned toward the paper. The ambassadors murmured. For one long, sickening moment it worked. The room tilted her way. And King Rowan let it tilt. He did not shout, did not snatch the paper, did not call the guard. He let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable, and then he said, quietly, so that the room had to lean in to hear him and so grew silent to do it, "Bring in my father." The great doors near me opened, and they wheeled King Alaric into the presence chamber. I will not forget it. The old king, wasted to a thread, wrapped in furs against a cold only he could feel, wheeled up the center of the room past the parting court to the foot of his son's throne. And behind him came Princess Adela and the keeper of the rolls with his great book, and the justice with his case of documents. The old king's eyes were bright and clear in his ruined face, and they found Morwenna, and they did not leave her. "Read it to me," the old king said. His voice was faint, but the room was silent as a tomb, and every word carried. "The decree. Read me the date, Morwenna. Read me the words you say I wrote." Morwenna's certainty flickered only for an instant, but I saw it. "Your Majesty," she said, turning her play to him now, gentling her voice, "you were unwell. You may not recall." "I recall everything," said Alaric. "That is the tragedy of my sickness, madam. It took my body and left me my mind, so that I have watched, clear-eyed, every theft you made with my own failing hand. I signed papers I did not read because you brought them with the poppy when the pain was worst, and you said only your name, my love. But I never signed a regency to you. I would have known. A man knows when he signs away his own children. Whatever that paper is, I did not make it." He turned his bright, terrible eyes to his son. "I have sworn as much before the keeper of the rolls and 3 justices in my right mind 4 days ago. It is written. Bring it forward." The keeper of the rolls opened his great book. The justice lifted the old king's sworn deposition and read it aloud. "I was mad in no particular. She robbed the crown and the trust of my own grandchildren. Let no forged paper hide behind my sickness." And then the justices bent together over Morwenna's decree, and over a true decree of Alaric's brought for comparison, and over the seal. It was the seal that finished her. The senior justice, an old dry man named Furrers who had served 3 sovereigns and could not be hurried, held Morwenna's paper to the light, and then held a true impression beside it. And he said, in a voice without any drama in it at all, which made it worse, The matrix of the king's seal carries a chip on the lower left of the crest, made when it was dropped in the 11th year of the reign. Every true impression bears the flaw. This impression does not bear it. This seal was cut fresh from a copy. This decree is a forgery, and a forgery of the king's own seal is treason under the statute, and has been since the founding of the realm. The room did not gasp, it did something worse. It exhaled a long, low sound of 100 people all understanding, at the same moment, exactly what they had been about to be fooled into. The tilt reversed. I watched the doubting lords lean away from Morwenna now as fast as they had leaned toward her, the way men step back from a thing they have just realized is on fire. And Morwenna understood in that exhale that she had lost the room, lost the realm, lost everything her cleverness had built, and that she was standing in the open, in front of the whole court, with a treason around her neck and no 40 swords coming, because the 40 swords were penned in the forecourt by a captain who had read her at 3 doors. That was the moment she stopped being clever. That was the moment the hard road ran out and she reached, at the very end, for the thing that has no cunning in it at all. "Guards!" Morwenna cried, and her voice cracked the silence like a whip. She flung out her arm toward the throne, toward Rowan, toward the old king in his chair, toward the whole line of them. "I am your queen, and I command you, seize this pretender and his puppet court. Arrest the boy who calls himself king. Take them all in the name of the lawful regent of Eldermore." It hung there, the command of a queen, ringing off the marble, in a room full of armed men sworn to obey the crown. And for the length of one heartbeat I felt the old pull of it, the voice of authority, high and certain, telling you what to do, and every trained bone in your body wanting to move to it. No guardsman moved. Not one red tunic in that long room so much as shifted his weight. Because we had all, every one of us, been made to read the order book that week. Vale had seen to it, quietly, guardroom by guardroom, since the morning at the door, and every man there knew the one line, that no command from any mouth however high can bind a guardsman to break the law, that an unlawful order is no order at all. A queen's command to arrest the lawful king of Eldermore was not an order. It was a crime spoken aloud, and the men she called upon to commit it stood still as the statues she had always taken them for, and let the crime fall to the floor unobeyed. Morwenna stared at the unmoving red line, and I watched the last of her world go out of her eyes. She had staked everything on the certainty that when a queen commands, swords move. They had not moved. She was alone in the middle of the greatest room in the realm, and no one at all was coming. And then she did the thing that ended it. Lord Cassius wore, as lords wear at a state reception, a ceremonial dagger at his belt, a jeweled, blunt-looking thing, more ornament than weapon, but steel and edged, and long as a man's forearm. The search at the door did not take it. A lord's dress dagger at a reception is as unremarkable as his buttons, and Cassius was not of the searched household but a guest of the blood. Morwenna turned fast and pulled it from her son's belt before he understood what she was doing. Cassius actually reached after it, too late, his soft face gone white, and she turned back toward the throne with the bared blade in her hand. I have gone over it 1,000 times, what she meant by it. I do not think, even now, that she meant murder in any planned way. I think she had simply reached the bottom of herself and found nothing there, but the wish to make the room afraid of her one last time, to be large, to force the ending onto her own terms. But intention is a thing for the heart of God to weigh. What the law weighs is the deed. And the deed was this. The Queen Consort Morwenna, in the presence chamber before the assembled court, drew a naked blade and turned it toward the king of Eldermore and toward the old king in his chair, and took a step and raised it. To draw steel against the sovereign within the palace in the presence chamber, there is no older or graver crime in the realm. It is the one line that has no ambiguity in it, no clever paper, no whisper, no doubt. It is treason bared to the eye, and the law's answer to it is written plain, and every guardsman is made to know that answer before he is ever trusted with a post. And Captain Corwin Vale, who had stood all that long morning at the foot of the throne steps still as stone, unmade himself from stone in the space of half a breath. He did not draw his own weapon. He did not need to, and I have thought since that he chose not to, that even in that half-second some part of that extraordinary man was already thinking of the difference between stopping a crime and answering blood with blood. He crossed the open marble in 3 strides, a big man, fast the way big disciplined men are fast, without any waste in it, and he caught Morwenna's raised wrist in his white-gloved hand and turned it up and out, away from the throne, and the dagger's point went toward the high windows and toward no one, and with his other hand he closed on the hilt and took it, simply took it, the way you take a dangerous thing from someone who has never truly known how to hold one. It was over in a moment. There was no blood. There was no blow. There was a captain and a queen and his hand around her wrist, and the blade lifted clear and turned harmless in his grip, and the whole vast room frozen around the two of them. And then Morwenna, held, disarmed, her forgery exposed and her command refused and her blade taken, did the last defiant thing left to her. She drew herself up to her full height in the captain's grip, and she said, in a voice that still, even then, tried to command, "Take your hand off me. I am the queen. You do not touch the queen. You do not dare. There is no man in this realm with the right to lay a hand upon me." And Captain Vale answered her. He did not raise his voice. In all the years since, the men who were in that room have repeated his words to me, and no 2 of them agree on the exact wording, because a thing like that grows in the telling, but I was near enough, and I will set down what I heard, and I will swear to it. "Madam," he said, "there is no man in this realm above the law, and that is the whole of your mistake. You believe the crown you wear lifts you over it. It does not. It never did. It only means you stand where the law can see you best." He did not loose her wrist. He raised his voice now, at last, not in anger, but so the whole court and the ambassadors and the justices and the king would hear every word, and there would be no doubt afterward of what had been done and by what right. "In the name of the crown of Eldermore and the law of this realm, I arrest you, Morwenna, sometime Queen Consort, upon the charge of the forgery of the king's seal, and upon the charge of treason in commanding the seizure of the king's person, and upon the charge of drawing a blade against the sovereign in his own presence chamber. You will answer for these before the justices of the realm, as any subject must, of whatever rank or house or blood. Guardsman Penhale." "Captain," I said, and my voice did not shake, which to this day I count among the proudest facts of my life. "Irons and a closed escort. She is to be held with every courtesy her person is owed, and not 1 grain of the liberty her crime has forfeited. Harm her at your peril, free her at your peril. She is the law's now, not ours and not the king's." "Yes, Captain." The whole of that had taken, from her cry of "guards," to the word "captain" out of my own mouth, perhaps a minute and a half. It has taken me the rest of my life to understand it. Here is the thing I did not expect, the thing that has stayed with me longer than the blade or the arrest. When Vale spoke the charge and named the arrest, every eye in that room went not to Morwenna but to the king. Because in the whole history of Eldermore, no captain of the guard had ever laid hands on a crowned or consort head, and every soul there knew that a captain who arrests a queen has, in that instant, either the king entirely behind him or nothing at all behind him but the noose. If Rowan flinched, if he said 1 soft word, "She is my father's wife, let us not release her, we will settle this quietly," then Vale had ended his own life to stop a crime, and the crime would go on wearing a crown. The king did not flinch. He rose from the throne of Eldermore, and he came down the 3 shallow steps, past his uncle the chancellor, who was still gray with shock, and he stood beside his captain in front of the whole court, and he set his own hand upon Vale's shoulder, so that every lord and every ambassador would see exactly where the king stood. "The captain of my guard has done his duty," King Rowan said, "and he has done it better than his king, for I confess to this court that I hesitated and he did not, and I had given him leave in advance to be braver than I was, because I feared this very moment would find me weak. A murmur ran the room. A king does not often say such a thing aloud. Hear me, all of you. The law of Eldermore binds every soul beneath this roof, and the highest most of all, for the higher a person stands the more of the realm falls when they fall. This woman forged my father's seal. She commanded the seizure of your king. She drew steel in this chamber. She will not answer for it less because she wore a coronet. She will answer for it more, because a coronet is a trust, and she has spent it. Let the justices convene. Let it be lawful and slow and open, and let no man ever say the house of Harrowgate has one law for the small and another for the great. We have one law. My captain has just shown you its price and its worth. And the old king, from his chair, said one word in his thread of a voice, and it carried because the room was silent for it. Good, said Alaric, and he looked at his son with something in his ruined face that I can only call the peace of a man who has watched his own weakness be redeemed by his child's strength. Good, Rowan, that is the king your mother hoped for. They took Morwenna out through the great doors, and the court parted for her, and she went with her chin high because pride was the one thing they could not put in irons. I walked at her shoulder. She said nothing to me the whole length of that corridor until we reached the door of the chamber where she would be held, and there she stopped, and she looked at me, not at Vale, who had gone back to the king, but at me, the young guardsman, and she said, "You are all going to regret this. Crowns remember." "No, madam," I said, and I found that Vale's coin was in my mouth without my having to reach for it. "The law remembers. That is the difference, and it was already written down." She went in and the door closed, and I stood my post outside it, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel when a great tree comes down, not glad exactly, only aware that the shape of the sky has changed. The reckoning took the better part of a season, and it was everything the king had promised, lawful and slow and open. The justices convened a full tribunal, 3 of them with furs at their head, and they heard it all in the open court with the doors unbarred and the record kept. This was itself a kind of marvel, for the easy thing, the old thing, would have been to settle a fallen queen's fate behind closed doors with a quiet exile and no names named. Rowan forbade the easy thing. "If we judge her in the dark," he said, "we teach the realm that the great are still judged in the dark, and we will have changed nothing. Let it be in the light." Let the humblest tithe farmer in Eldermore be able to say, "I saw a queen answer to the same law that would answer me." The evidence came out piece by piece, the forged decree and the tale of the chipped seal, the old king's sworn deposition, the emptied trust of the late Queen Isolde, Rowan's mother, and the manor and the jewels and the endowment meant for the children, traced coin by coin into Cassius's houses, the 3 years of the household accounts, the 40 hired swords penned in the forecourt, and the drawn blade, sworn to by 100 witnesses. There was no whisper left that could survive it. The lords who had leaned toward Morwenna in that first tilt of the room came forward, some of them shamefaced, and gave their testimony straight, and the realm saw the whole machine of it laid bare on the table. Lord Cassius and Lady Verena were examined, and here the tribunal drew a careful line, for justice that cannot tell the difference between the schemer and the schemer's grown children is not justice, but revenge. Verena, it was found, had known little and done less. She had lent her marriage to her mother's design without understanding the shape of it, and she was stripped of the grants that had come to her by theft and left otherwise to live quietly, chastened, on what was honestly hers. Cassius was another matter. The money had run through his hands and his houses, and he had known, and he answered for the theft, and gave back what could be given back, and was barred from office and from the court for the rest of his life. But he had not drawn the blade, and he had not forged the seal, and the tribunal weighed him for what he had done and not for whose son he was, and I remember Vale nodding slowly when the sentence was read, as though the measured justice of it pleased him more than any punishment could have. And Morwenna herself. The charges were treason, the forgery of the king's seal, the command to seize the king, the drawn blade, and there is an old answer to treason in Eldermore, a hard one, a final one, and the whole realm knew it and waited to see whether the new king would use it on the woman who had tried to unmake him. It would have been lawful. Some of the lords, converts now, called for it loudly, the way the newly frightened always call loudest for blood. Rowan did not take it. He stood before the tribunal on the last day and he asked leave to speak to the sentence, and he said this: "I could take her life, and it would be within the law, and there is a part of me, the part that is still my father's frightened son, that wants to. I will not. Not because her crime is small, it is very great, but because I mean to found a reign, and I will not found it on the scaffold of my father's wife, and I will not teach my children." And here he glanced once briefly at Torrin and Malin and Bram, who were not in the room but whose safety had run under this whole matter like a buried stream, that the answer to a great enemy is to become one. Let her be stripped of every style and honor and grant she holds. Let the coronet be taken from her, for it was never again hers to wear. Let her be removed from the realm to a place appointed, and kept there under guard, in dignity but never in liberty, for the remainder of her life, and let her name be struck from every roll of the house of Harrowgate save the one that records this judgment, so that the realm remembers not her power but her fall and the law that felled her." He paused. "That is mercy. Let no one mistake it for weakness. It is the harder road, and I am done this week with the easy ones." And so it was done. They took the old Queen Consort's coronet and struck her styles, and removed her under close guard to a walled house in the far north of the realm. And there, I am told, she lived out her years in comfort and captivity both, and never once admitted that the fault had been her own, and died still believing that crowns remember. Perhaps they do. But she had wagered her life on the belief that a crown stands above the law, and she had spent her last free hour learning, in front of the whole court, that it does not, and that is a lesson the law remembered long after it had forgotten her name. King Alaric lived to see the judgment given, and did not live much past it. He died that autumn, quietly in his son's house, with his mind clear to the end and his conscience, I think, clearer than it had been in years, for he had named his own weakness aloud before he went, and refused to let it be used as a shield for the theft it had enabled. And there is a kind of courage in an old man doing that which I did not have the years to understand at the time. They buried him with honor, and the realm mourned him truly, and King Rowan reigned long and well after him, and Queen Isolde beside him, and the 3 children grew up in a house where they had learned, young, a thing most royal children never learn, that the guards along the walls are not their servants but the law's, and that this is the best protection a child of power can have. As for Captain Corwin Vale, the man who arrested a queen, he was offered within the month the very post that had been dangled to buy him, Lord Warden of the Palace, the command of the whole guard. He declined it. He said, and I was there, that a wardenship was a fine thing, but that he had discovered he was a captain, that a captain stands at a door, and that he would rather stand at the king's door for the rest of his service than sit behind a warden's table and never touch a door again. Rowan, who understood him by then, did not press it. He made Vale captain of the king's own body, the highest post that still stood at a door, and Vale held it until he was too old to stand a watch, and then he trained the men who would, and I was one of them, and that is the whole reason I am able to write this down. I asked him once, near the end of his life, whether he had ever been afraid, in that minute and a half in the presence chamber, with a queen's blade in the air, and no one yet moving, and his whole life balanced on whether a young king would back him or hang him. He thought about it a long time, the way he thought about everything. "No," he said at last, "I was not afraid, and I have wondered why, because I ought to have been, and I think it is this. Fear comes from not knowing what you will do. I already knew. I had known since the night I put the order book on the table and made you read it. The only thing left to happen in that room was the happening of it. A man who has already decided is not brave, Penhale. He is only early. Decide early. Then, when the great and terrible day comes and the queen is shouting and the room is tilting and every clever voice is telling you to look away, you will find you are not deciding anything at all. You are only doing the thing you decided long ago, when it was quiet and cost you nothing, and no one was watching but your own conscience and an open book. He is 30 years gone now. Morwenna is a footnote in the one role they left her in. And the young king who did not flinch is remembered, in the histories, as one of the great ones of the house of Harrowgate. But the thing I remember, the thing I have tried, in this whole long account, to set down plainly so that it is not lost, is smaller than a king and larger than a crown. It is a captain's white-gloved hand closing on a raised wrist, and a level voice saying there is no man in this realm above the law, and a queen learning, too late, that a coronet is not a shield but a place where the law can see you best. They asked her once, before the end, whether she had any regret. She said she regretted only that the guard had read the book. She never understood that this was the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. The book was open. He had read it. And when the day came, he could still read.